Welcome to Living Environment Regent Review Session 2. This is Ms. Winans. We will have a special guest appearance by Ms. Faye, and in this session we will cover homeostasis, immunity, and body systems. Disease is considered the failure to maintain homeostasis. So when we get sick, something has entered our body that has prevented our ability to maintain homeostasis. In order to prevent something from entering our body, we have three lines of defense that are part of our immune system. The first line of defense is our barrier. The main barrier is our skin. Any opening to the external environment that is not covered by skin is going to have some sort of mucus to trap foreign invaders. Things like earwax, in your nose you have snot, you have tears in your eyes, you have saliva in your mouth. It's all some kind of mucus that is going to prevent the substance from getting into your body. Also in your nose and in your trachea you have hair, also known as cilia. They constantly are working to sweep up any pathogen that gets sucked into your nasal cavity. This will either cause you to sneeze or cough. Sneeze if it's in your nose, cough if it's in your trachea. Finally, you have stomach acid in your stomach. So if there are any germs on the things that we eat, if we touch things and then touch our mouth and then swallow, we have hydrochloric acid in our stomach, which is designed to kill anything that enters our body. Second line of defense is the inflammatory response. So if you have seen this particular pathogen before and your immune system knows how to attack this substance, it'll trigger what is called a histamine response or an inflammatory response. It'll send out histamine, which is a hormone, which will cause your blood vessels in the area of the invasion to swell. The reason why we want the blood vessels to swell is because we want white blood cells to be able to get to that area of infection. Now, when it comes to allergies, which is a response that is happening to something that is harmless, it's not really going to attack our body or cause lack of homeostasis, but for some reason or another, somebody might have an allergy to, let's say, a food allergy. This second line of defense can be extremely dangerous to them because an inflammatory response near the trachea, so if you have your trachea, which is open and is what you breathe out of, and then you have the inflammatory response which expands those blood vessels, you can actually pinch off your trachea and you can pinch off your air supply. So that could be extremely dangerous for food allergies because you can stop breathing. So what people with allergies do is they take what is called an antihistamine, which counteracts the histamine inflammatory response. You could also, if it's a severe reaction, take what is called an EpiPen. So the second line of defense is if something enters your body, but you've seen it before and you know how to react to it. The third line of defense is when you actually will get sick. And this is because something has entered your body which your immune system does not recognize and does not know how to fight. So the time in which it prepares for the fight is going to be the time in which you get sick. And the third line of defense will end up in the creation of antibodies. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the third line of defense with a cartoon. So we're going to draw this little comic strip to help us better understand how our immune system reacts to pathogens that we haven't seen before. So I'm going to take out my pen, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my little pathogen. So here's my pathogen. it's going to have markers on the surface. We call these markers antigens. All of our cells have antigens, but our immune system recognizes them as being part of our body, just like when you go on a field trip and it says, hello, my name is Johnny from Limbrook High School. These antigens are name tags. Our cells have name tags and they say, hello, I'm a cell in Miss Winans' body. This antigen actually says, hello, I'm an infectious pathogen that is coming in to make you sick. So this is, the antigens are markers on the surface of the pathogen. So here's our pathogen. And antigens are on the pathogen. And they're the name tag that our white blood cells are constantly touring our body to make sure that we are attacking anything that has a foreign antigen. Now, if we notice this antigen and we realize it's not supposed to be there, then the time in which we go to the next stage is the time we get sick. So we have white blood cells that are called B cells, also known as memory cells. Their job is to make shape-specific antibodies. Antibodies are proteins, and from all the examples we're going to see throughout these review sessions, we know that shape determines the function of a protein. So antibodies are proteins, they're going to be shape specific. So the antibodies for this particular antigen we're going to make are going to have a triangular shape so that they match up with the antigens on the surface of the pathogen. The next thing we have to do is we have to mark our pathogen. So now he's a little concerned because we found him and we figured out that he's up to no good. So what we're going to do, I'm going to draw my antigens again. Okay, but now we're going to flag them. We're going to put the antibodies on the pathogen. Okay, so it's a good thing that we use antibodies because there are some conditions called autoimmune diseases in which the white blood cells gobble up healthy cells. So you don't want our white blood cells going around and just gobbling up anything. So the antibodies provide an insurance that we're making sure that we are marking and destroying something that is going to cause harm to our body. So it's really important that our white blood cells only destroy things that are marked with antibodies. We have another type of white blood cell, which is called the T cell. And I kind of draw these to make them pretty peaceful. But in reality, they can actually really do some damage. It is known that T cells can actually destroy a pathogen on their own. But the other thing that they're responsible for doing is sometimes they're called watcher T cells. And what they're going to do is the T cells are going to watch the pathogen until the white blood cell arrives. Okay? Okay, so we made the antibodies, we tagged the pathogen, the T cells are watching it, and so the last thing that we are waiting for is here comes our big white blood cells, our phagocytes or our macrophages. Okay, our pathogen's really concerned now, so I'm going to draw him with a sad face. Okay, and he's going to engulf that pathogen and destroy it. The last thing we want to do is we want our B cells, our memory cells, to remember how to make antibodies for future infections. Okay, so at this point we are now considered to be actively immune to this particular pathogen. Okay, there are two ways to become actively immune to a particular pathogen. You can get infected by the pathogen and get sick, or what you can do is you can also take a vaccine. You should not get sick from a vaccine because the vaccine is a dead or weakened form of the virus. There is an autoimmune disease that does affect the immune response, and that is the HIV virus. The HIV virus mutates our T cells, and basically what it does is it makes the T cells blind. And what happens is if enough of the T cells are blind, this pathogen that's supposed to be attacked by the phagocyte or the white blood cell can sometimes get away. So people who have HIV, once enough of their T cells are compromised, they are considered to have what we call AIDS. And that means that they cannot defend against normal conditions that our immune system usually could defend against. So they can die from a common cold or the flu or bronchitis. Okay? So that is an immune response, and that's how we become actively immune. And then we learned a little bit of extra about how the HIV virus can compromise an immune response. All right, I'd like you to take a few minutes to attempt this question. It states, proteins on the surface of a human cell and on a bird influenza virus are represented in the diagram below. In the space below, draw a change in the bird influenza virus that would allow it to infect the human cell. And then we're going to explain how this change in the virus could come about. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to try it on your own. Okay, you got to remember that every pathogen is shape specific, so we got to pay attention to the shape. So we'll notice that the human cell has docking receptors that are triangular shaped. And right now the bird influenza that can only infect the birds has a circular shape. So the only way that this virus could dock on the surface of this cell is if we change the shape of the docking proteins. So if this is the bird influenza virus, in order for it to infect humans, there would have to be triangular shaped docking proteins because the shape has to match. The only way this will happen is if the bird influenza virus experiences a random genetic mutation. In emergency situations, our nervous system has to react much faster than in standard conditions. So what it will do is it will activate the reflex arc. Now, most information is processed through a sensory neuron. That sensory neuron then travels to the spinal cord. The spinal cord travels the information to the brain. The brain processes the information, determines a response, sends the response back down the spinal cord, and then back to a motor neuron, which will cause a response. Okay, so usually it goes sensory, spinal, brain, spinal, motor. In the reflex arc, we need to respond to an emergency situation. We don't have time to go through the brain. So in the reflex arc, what happens is we have the sensory neuron, which is going to detect danger. It's going to sense things. It's going to involve your 5 senses. They're going to detect stimuli in the environment, and if it's a dangerous stimuli, when it reaches the spinal cord, it will be intercepted by what is called an interneuron. The interneuron will determine if it's a dangerous signal or if it has time to go to the brain. In this case, we're touching a hot iron. We don't have time to go to the brain because if we go to the brain, by the time we remove our hand, there'll be serious damage done to our hand. So what happens is the interneuron intercepts the signal, prevents it going from the brain, and causes the motor neuron to contract the muscles to create a spastic movement to move the hand away from the iron before damage is done. That's why when you are in contact with a dangerous stimuli, you react and then you realize how you reacted. So if you accidentally touched an iron, you would actually move your hand before you say ouch. The endocrine system is another way of responding and communicating the maintenance of homeostasis. However, the endocrine system is going to move a little slower and can last longer amounts of time. Your endocrine system, unlike the nervous system, it doesn't use nervous impulses. It actually utilizes your circulatory system. So I'm going to use red over here to kind of show you a blood vessel. Okay, so over here we have an endocrine gland. Glands are the organs that are responsible for producing hormones, and they're going to secrete hormones into the bloodstream. And then the bloodstream is going to travel the hormones, and when they come in contact with a cell that they're supposed to communicate with, that hormone will diffuse out of the bloodstream and then communicate with that cell. But sometimes we want to send messages and we don't want to interact with all the cells. So again, we use proteins. Protein function is determined by shape. So we have 2 cells that are next to each other. We have cell A and we have cell C. Okay, you'll notice that they have receptors that are waiting for the hormone. The hormone will only communicate with the cell in which the hormone shape matches. So therefore, cell C will be the target cell for this particular hormone. Cell A is considered a non-target cell because the shape of the hormone would not fit in the receptor. Therefore, that hormone will not be able to communicate with that cell. All right, let's take a look at this question. Botulinum toxin is a protein produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum. It causes a serious form of food poisoning in humans. In a very dilute form, it is also commonly used to eliminate some signs of aging, such as wrinkles. It does this by preventing nerves from releasing a chemical messenger called acetylcholine into the synapse, space between a nerve cell and a muscle cell. The toxin affects the process that causes the muscle cell to contract and form wrinkles. The diagram below represents a process that is involved in the formation of wrinkles. Complete the diagram by drawing an appropriate, okay, so I'm going to underline drawing because we should be drawing something, an appropriate structure on the muscle cell membrane, okay, muscle cell membrane, that would allow the nerve cell to communicate with this muscle. Okay, so we have a nerve cell. It looks like we have these vesicles. The vesicles are releasing neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters have a circular shape. So in order for a cell to receive a signal, it has to put out a protein receptor. The shape of the hormone is a circle. So therefore, we must be putting out protein receptors that would have a circular shape. Here is a picture of the human respiratory system. It consists of the nasal passage, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the two bronchial tubes that lead to the lungs, and at the end of the bronchial tubes, you have bronchi, which lead to alveoli. The diaphragm is going to control the air pressure inside the chest cavity. When the diaphragm is pulled down, what happens is there's more space inside the chest cavity, which lowers the air pressure. This forces air through the nasal passage, down the trachea, into the bronchial tubes, and the lungs and the air sacs called alveoli will fill with air. Gas exchange will occur between the alveoli and the capillary. When the diaphragm is relaxed, it creates a dome. This dome reduces the space in the chest cavity, increases the air pressure. This increase in air pressure is going to force air out through the bronchial tubes, through the trachea, and out the nasal passage. So when the diaphragm is pulled down, you inhale, and when the diaphragm is relaxed, you exhale. Another important structure in the lungs is the alveoli. The alveoli are super important because you'll notice that each alveoli is in contact with our bloodstream, particularly allows access to our red blood cells. The function of our red blood cells is to carry oxygen around our body so that they eventually can come into our cells, drop off the oxygen so that the cells can perform cellular respiration and pick up the waste of cellular respiration, which is CO2. So the big point of alveoli is to allow for gas exchange between the capillaries and the lungs.